Uranus is really wanting you to develop the ability to speak as yourself, to communicate authentically with the right people and in the way that is true. And it is going to really want to fuck with a lot. It's very Truman Show. If you've seen the movie They Live, I really recommend it, with Rowdy Roddy Piper, which we get one of my all-time favorite lines in cinema. I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. But it's all about these sort of like transmissions that need to get fucked with. Uranus is the trickster. Welcome to the pigs of the slaughterhouse, to the lunatics of the asylum, to the werewolves, vampires, and absolute nightmares of the universe, my beloved sex symbols, star children, and potato people. This is going to be quite a banger of an episode. As always, this is one I've been really looking forward to for a while, because we are going to be talking about basically the next decade of human civilization. And you know that I love these episodes because it doesn't even feel speculative. We're getting to put the pieces together of what has come before and what is to come presently. And we get to kind of see how it's all going to play out. And what's fun with this podcast, as we've seen, is I can make some, I don't even want to say predictions, but I can kind of look at some of the themes, and then as soon as we record these, get them in the can, and they go to air, things start to play out in ways that fit the prophecy, but far exceed anything I could have predicted. I mean, let me just say, when we recorded the Lilith in Sagittarius episode, I could not have envisioned the fate of Nicki Minaj, which is still unfurling. The Sagittarius Nicki Minaj, I could not have foreseen that. I also could not have foreseen Tiana Taylor's Oscar race. So we have a lot of pretty interesting things happening in that regard. So let's get cooking. We are going to be talking today about the planet Uranus, which is entering the sign Gemini. I'm going to explain what Uranus is, what Gemini is, what that means, what it's meant in the past, and what it means for you big picture and interpersonally. So just to get the dates, Uranus was in Gemini for an amuse-bouche, July 7th through November 7th, 2025. It is officially no going back, April 26th through May 22nd, 2033. So this April 26th, 2026 through May 22nd, 2033. That's quite a chapter. That's quite a saga. So what is Uranus and why is it taking so long? Uranus, we've talked about this before. There are planets which have a closer orbit to the sun. So if you think about Mercury, the moon, Venus, so those are moving pretty fast. They're orbiting the sun quickly. They're moving through every sign at a month or 2 months at a time. Great. Those give us a lot of information about who and what you are and what's going on for you and what's incarnating on the day-to-day, month-to-month. You then have the outer planets. These are planets which are further away from the sun, so they have a slower orbit, and therefore they spend years in each sign, and their themes play out a bit more in the big picture. So it's less of these sort of, oh wow, that September I had a lot of realizations, as opposed to I am now going through a years-long saga which has certain themes of resonance and specific flashpoint climactic moments. So Uranus is one of what I call the Dark Masters. I would call the Dark Masters Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They're far out. They deal with these sort of larger global themes. Uranus is known as the liberator, the trickster, the revelator, the chaos maker. Uranus, and if you read Tarnus's Cosmos and Psyche, which I recommended in previous episodes, that's kind of the book that got me into astrology. It's called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnus. He kind of says that Uranus should really be named Prometheus. The themes of Uranus are this: liberation, awakening or exposing you to these very new technologies or ideas or movements or kind of realms which rip off the straitjacket. Or, I think this is Alan Oken who says it basically burns the house down so that you can be set free of your imprisonment. If you think about the Tower card in tarot, that's very much Uranus. The idea that the monolith is on fire and you are being forced to jump to freedom. And the jump itself is very jagged and dangerous and possibly fatal. So Uranus, as a planetary archetype, deals a lot with these sort of quantum leaps. And whenever we think about quantum leaps, we think about progress and backlash, new technologies, or like I said, ideas, revolutionary movements, and then the aftermath or the sort of integration of all of these things. And, the idea of Prometheus was is he a god or a titan, who wanted to give fire to the mortals. And Zeus basically punishes him because Zeus forbade him from that, because he says, listen, if you give fire to the mortals, we, the gods, are going to become useless to them. They're not going to need us anymore. Prometheus's whole thing was give them a chance. We have to give them the fire and see what they do with it. So there's two edges to this. The idea of progress, or us being given the fire of consciousness or the new technology which is going to change humankind, ... is that there's always an ambivalence to it, which is the way that human progress works is we usually don't know how to regulate or balance or ration or, develop something at the adequate, reasonable, responsible clip. We tend to have something really big emerge, which then explodes. And frankly, I hate to say this, but when it comes to Uranus and Gemini, and I'll explain why later, things will be exploding on a literal atomic level. But, there's always the ebb and flow and the pendulum swing when it comes to progress. And when we look at things like, I don't even want to get into the AI thing because frankly, these people need to shut up already. But it is one of those things where it's like, is anyone stopping to ask what this is really for or how this could be regulated? And that is a big consequence when we look at these Uranus moments, which is like, whoa, that was going on way too fast. And then when the backlash happens, not to say that backlashes are good or right, because usually backlashes are the straitjacket being forced back on and us being gaslit into believing that it needs to be. But there is this thing of like, oh, right, this needed to be course corrected and it wasn't. So that's kind of the big picture, Uranus. On an interpersonal level and in your chart, Uranus will deal with a few things. Uranus is known as the queer planet. It is the planet of, it's where the outsider point of view is going to be coming in. It is in your chart, it is speaking to where your frequency is different, where you speak a different language. It may deal with events which kind of broke the feed of the matrix and sent you on your own path. It may deal with these sort of channels of genius, and it may serve as the trickster in your chart. Saturn is kind of the all-father overlord of the chart. Uranus might be the rebel or revolutionary who either you embody or who's kind of fucking up your own sense of control. Okay. On a personal level, a Uranus transit in your chart is going to be speaking to a period of revolution and reinvention. So it's important when you listen to this episode, we are going to be talking about the transition of Uranus from the sign Taurus into the sign Gemini, and I'm going to give you those dates, etc., etc. I would look at where is this going down in your chart? What arena of your life is this hitting? Because whatever arena that is, it's going to be speaking to a reinvention in the entire paradigm of how you think about relationships or family or career, wherever it is in your chart. It is going to be spelling out a lot of chaos that you couldn't have seen coming, a lot of like new things that didn't exist 3 years ago that are now these huge players in the whole opera that are going to be changing the whole dynamic. Fine. You'll also want to know what planets Uranus is going to be hitting or interacting with, because those archetypes are going to go through a complete 180, frankly. Okay. I'm going to catch you up a little bit on Uranus in Taurus, which it's basically where it's been since 2018, 2019. And then I'm going to explain to you what it looks like in Gemini, okay? So since like this started in 2018, May through November 2018, it took a flash. And then from March 7th, 2019 through basically now, April 25th, 2026, Uranus was in Taurus. Taurus is the sign of the body, fertility, embodiment, autonomy. Taurus deals a lot with money. So there's a few things that happen. It's pretty crazy. Like from the minute this started, we had the Brett Kavanaugh trial, which was this bizarre moment of, that was kind of the beginning of the backlash. So Taurus deals a lot with like fertility and a woman's body, and Taurus is all about like Venus incarnate. And when Uranus entered Taurus, we entered a very intense backlash period. This includes Brett Kavanaugh, this includes Amber Heard, the Amber Heard trial, where suddenly what a woman says, actually, not suddenly, but we re-entered this sort of period of, does what a woman says about her body or her experience or her point of view matter? We had during the Uranus in Taurus a huge, really exciting boom with trans identity. I remember when Pose came out, I think in 2018 or 2019, I was an editor at Time Out and I got to interview all the cast members. And I remember my editor, who was a straight guy, basically, he wanted me to interview the two straight white actors from the show. And I said to him, look, this show has 5 lead actresses who are trans women of color. We should interview them. And my editor was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And, you know, we're now so far ahead of that. So we really got, and by the way, 2018, 2019, the rise of Kim Petras, you know, we'll never have it better than that. But we had a huge boom in this conversation around what is my body? How do I want to define it? What is my gender? What is my sexuality? And of course, you know, we also had Barbie come out. Barbie, which is basically about a woman entering, like, becoming a woman. This disembodied idea, encountering her own body and encountering what it is to have a real body in the world. And of course, with that, we have all the backlash. We had a huge abortion backlash, a huge trans backlash. So I'm bringing all this up to say, you know, Uranus deals a lot with, we're going forward, and then we're going to show you the response to it. Taurus deals so much with the body and body autonomy. We had also like the world of steroids, weightlifting, Ozempic, somatic therapy, like all of that really exploded in a big way. And Uranus is so much about these extremes. So we're now seeing this sort of like, with Ozempic, frankly, like, okay, we're now in a whole new paradigm with that. Or if you look at like steroid culture, it is so now every day and kind of uncoupled from a lot of the things it used to be related to. You know, the other thing, of course, to say with Uranus in Taurus, Taurus deals a lot with money and the autonomy, control. So we are now in a new age of oligarchs, tech oligarchs, and autocrats. These are kind of some of the big things that happened with Taurus. A lot of it was good in terms of the self, personhood. We've learned a lot. And we also have the extremes of that, which are we're at new levels of dehumanization, new levels of private wealth, new levels of people taking control. So that's Uranus and Taurus. I'll just say, like, I am a Taurus. So just so you can kind of get an understanding of what this looks like. For me, because my sun sign is in Taurus and I had Uranus in my sun sign for 8 years, 2018 through now was the most tumultuous, tempestuous, revolutionary, up is down period of my life. Every assumption I had about my personal reality has been flipped. That said, now that I think I'm a bit like the dust is kind of settling and I'm crawling out of the ruins, now that I'm kind of the hag who has endured, I'm so grateful it all happened, because all of the arenas in my life where I think I just assumed that everything was the way it was supposed to be, Uranus said, I'm a trickster, I'm a revelator, I'm going to really show you what's out there and what's the truth, and I'm going to take you to all these extremes so you can kind of figure out your frequency. So I'm quite grateful for it. Wherever Uranus is going in your chart, or wherever it was in Taurus, I'm curious what it did in that part of your life. So let's talk about Gemini. Gemini is tricky. Gemini is inherently tricky. Taurus is very much about the person, the self. I am a self-contained vessel and being. Gemini is a lot more about conversation, dialogue, and pushing other people's limits to get an understanding of where one lands. Gemini is very much about relativity. Gemini, it's twins. It's duality, dialogue, discourse, conversation. And because it's a sign of duality, Gemini deals a lot with extremes. One of the reasons that I think Geminis are more triggering for some is because they often, when you have a conversation with a Gemini, and this isn't from an ill will, I think this is an inherent part of their nature, there is this sort of like thought experiment thing that you people, often do, where they want to push something as far as it can get so that they can understand what it is and what it means. And I think for those of us who don't want to be questioned, that can be really triggering or frustrating, which is like, why did you need to take that there? Like, why did you need to take this from a first kiss to the hypothetical of a sauna orgy? Like, why does every situation have to go from 0 to 100? But Gemini is really trying to either test the extremes or find a place of ambivalence in the middle. And to do that, it needs to flesh out these sort of assumptions or moralisms. Gemini deals a lot with how we communicate. Gemini also deals with the personal sphere of influence. What are you taking in? Not in the big picture, not in the like larger life lessons that you've learned. In terms of the everyday, who are you talking to? What impact are you having? What is your kind of private bubble? What is your sphere of influence? So what does all of this mean? We have been living in a period of moralistic extremes. And these divisive assumptions about good and evil and right and wrong. And that's not to say that like nothing means anything, because I do think that there is like definitive good and that there's a lot of injustice happening, obviously. When Uranus enters Gemini, though, a lot of the conversations we've been having get kind of scrambled. We're already kind of seeing what has happened. If you look at something really complicated like weight discourse, what happens when Ozempic enters the discourse? And now a lot of the conversation we were having, or a lot of the way that things were being marketed, is already getting kind of like the frequency of that transmission is now getting called into question. This will definitely be happening with things like the gay narrative or the coming out story. A lot of these things that are these that we have been assuming, okay, this is the way things are. These are the trajectories of these sort of moral dialogues that we have. When Uranus enters Gemini, it's trying to say, what is the real moral meaning of all of these? Why do we speak about these things in the way we speak about them? I know this sounds really trippy. The internet has made a lot of the ways that we communicate or pass judgment on things very literal and very much rigid in terms of, I had this experience and it means this and it makes me this sort of a person. That comes from having to write your Grindr profile or whatever. I came out at this age and it meant this, and now I am an ambassador for this. As Uranus enters Gemini, we kind of see all of that getting a little bit blurred, which is like a lot of the things that we'd ascribed meaning to, we're now really needing to ask questions about what any of that meant. Okay, so that's kind of an introduction. We're about to go a little bit deeper. I want to tell you a little bit about what happened the last few times that Uranus was in Gemini. So get this. 1859 through 1865, Civil War. Also, though, we get the invention of railroads, the telegraph, photography, and we get dissemination of newspapers. Interesting. 1775 to 1781, that's the previous one before that. Founding of the USA after the Revolutionary War. And then the last one, August 1941 through June 1949, give or take. So what's going on during all of these? We're having insane periods of war, and I don't really think I need to explain that one to you in terms of what's going on in the world right now, but there's more. What's interesting about these war periods is that they bring about these bizarre leaps in terms of progress. Plastic during World War II got converted. We started to see it getting converted into nylon or plexiglass or these sort of everyday plastics that are then used in hospitals, etc., because they're needing to be used in the war capacity. Not to say that plastic is good, but it's one of these things where something being used in a military context is then transforming or having another use in the rest of the world. I read this really interesting article in the New York Review of Books where they were talking about how in the USSR, because of these ideas of hyper equality that extreme communism brought on, the USSR pre-Stalin was very integrated. There were nearly 1,000 women fighting in World War II, including some of these like legendary female snipers. And women in Russia were becoming doctors long before they were in America. That said, it was not such a great time for like human beings or human rights. And then, of course, there was a huge swing back. When you look at the Civil War, not to be like it was such a great time, but yeah, because of the war, we're seeing the dissemination of things like telegraphs and railroads because there was a real need for it. So it's this really bizarre thing going on. And then, even if you think about like my beloved comic books, which started out as these sort of World War II propaganda things. Same with television, same with a lot of the kind of big advents of the 1940s. So what does that mean? A lot of things, the thing with Gemini, because it's the duality, it's the twins, Geminis are often very thought of as kind of like, you can't really get a grip on them because they're doing a lot of things all at once. This is the issue with Uranus and Gemini. Not to be like the 40s were amazing and it's such a slay, but you have these horrible, horrible things happening that are related to war. You also have these big leaps in terms of invention or adaptation or things that are kind of having these dark uses then being adapted or moved into the everyday. Do you get what I'm saying? For this to happen, none of us can be too morally rigid about how progress works. I want to say, like, a lot of we have been in a sort of cultural moment of trying to break down where things come from and how that can be problematic. And I think that's very useful because it helps redeem the past and give honor or light or attention to those who have been cast in shadow. The issue with Uranus in Gemini is that the lightning is going to be crackling in a million directions, and you're going to be having multiple things happening at the same time. So you're going to be having the USSR, and then you're going to be having women being snipers. And before you can even be asking about on a core, like on a core moral societal basis, why are there women snipers? Why are there snipers? We're getting these huge advancements that are going to have these bigger historical precedents, but it's not really static enough to cast any moral literalistic judgment on, because by the time you do, it's going to flip again. And that's the other thing with the 40s. You know, you have Rosie the Riveter, you have Wonder Woman, you have Lois Lane, you have women who are basically running the show during World War II. And then suddenly the war's over and it's time to be housewives again. And what are you talking about? You should be obsessed with cleaning products and wearing skirts. And it's the same with the USSR, by the way. The minute Stalin really rose to power, he was like, enough with this with this gender equality stuff. Let's flip it back. So that's the thing. Gemini is so much, like I said, about the swing between extremes, about the twins. And I think we're going to be observing we're already in a backlash era, but the thing with Gemini is that the backlash is so whiplash that my one hope with it is that I think people who are very entrenched in like their beliefs are going to be observing things flipping so fast that they won't really be able to stay in place for very long, because we're already in a period where nothing is fixed and nothing really means everything. I mean, I can't even really get into the Epstein thing, but it is so big and it keeps changing, and the people who it casts shadows on keeps changing. Okay. So to zoom back into what this means now, we are now in a new period when it comes to AI, when it comes to technology. And, when I was speaking with a future guest of the show about who is a ketamine therapist, and he was saying to me, listen, with everything going on with Anthony Kennedy, of which there's plenty, in all of the madness, a lot of psychedelic therapies are getting finally approved. And a lot of the kind of bureaucratic, moralistic red tape from like the 60s are getting released. And it's one of those things where you're like, oh, wow, how do I hold all of these truths at once? We already know about the fucked up shit that technology has wrought on the world, and it is not going to necessarily be getting any better, but it's also brought a lot of good things on. I actually have had a few arguments about this, but I had a one night stand once try to explain to me that religion is bad and it has only done bad things for the world. And I had to be like, I get it. I'm not trying to be like, no, the Catholic Church has only ever been a sleigh and like amazing and beautiful, and the Crusades were cool, and those priests have only been great for everyone. It's not that. But religion and religious institution, whether directly or through these sort of offshoot byproducts, have led to these ideas or inventions or concepts that have furthered human evolution or human artistic vision, in ways that we can't really contain. And that's going to be the truth with technology. And that's going to be the truth with a lot of these sort of backlash moments. You can't contain anything into a linear story of what is and what isn't, and what has been and what hasn't been. So that's going to be a big challenge for everyone, by the way, because as much as we like to think of ourselves, people who are really active on the internet and like who like to comment and criticize, I think there is this idea. I was talking about this with a friend right now. We're now in this period where we're doing all of these sort of like redemption documentaries. Like, this is the documentary about Britney Spears. This is the documentary about Janet Jackson. This is the one about Pamela Anderson. The presumption when you watch these documentaries is like, we who are making and watching them are so much more evolved than we were when these things were happening. But that's not really how things work. And the idea when you're online that you're like commentating on something and you're like, look how fucked up these people are or were, and look how smart and snarky I am. This era is really about like, let's all be careful, because a lot of what we consider to be correct can't be, because everything is in this bizarre electric dialogue that can't really be contained. So that's like that's going to be tough. And again, I'm not trying to do this sort of like, we need to understand what the people on the other side are thinking and have empathy, because I think we've all heard that a million times, and that can be so used for gaslighting. And there genuinely are people who have way too much power who are fucking over the rest of us. So I don't want to go in that direction. But what I do want to say is like, you can't be hoarding any sort of linear consolidated idea of your life or the world or the history of something, because it's all so weird and complicated and has all of these bizarre ambivalences that you kind of just have to make peace with. I think we've been talking a lot as we're coming out of the Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces era into Saturn and Neptune and Aries. I think the narrative around victimhood and aggressor is going to get a lot more complicated. A big thing I've been thinking about a lot is like IFS, which is that, we've talked about this on the podcast, but like interfamily systems, which is a form of therapy, which is about the idea that within us are all of these different parts and all of these different aspects, rather than just like, this is my bad side, this is my good side, this is my inner child. You have these different aspects of you, and you can't really say that one is good or bad. It's a constellation. We're going to have to shift into that mindset. Okay, so there's that aspect. I'll say this. The United States will be undergoing what is called a Uranus return in July 2027. The president of the United States is a Gemini. So Uranus will really be coming to play the chaos game. The president is a Gemini chaotician. Uranus, who is the trickster, will either introduce a new chaos agent who will usurp him, or kind of like bring some sort of an order to it. Only time can tell. I will say I would be really concerned about this is not news for anyone, but as we know, like pretty much all microchips that are used for phones and computers and for AI are produced in Taiwan, and we don't know what's going to happen there. But Saturn and Uranus are both going to be in Gemini over the next few years, and Gemini, which deals so much with communications and how we engage with one another. With these planets there, I think a lot of the assumptions around how tech works and these assumptions around what our phones do for us are going to get really flipped. I don't know that means that we're going to like lose our phones and lose Wi-Fi and then have to like become these sort of farm people again. I'm not necessarily sure that that's what it is. But I think a lot of the questions about like who is controlling the feed, what happens when these monoliths go down, the tower, tarot, we're all going to need to really observe and really like be clear that we can survive if some of these things flip. When it comes to the thing about technology and communication, let's zoom in a little bit. What, who do you talk to every day? How do you speak? Where did your language come from? What is the sort of modality? And this is just a big internet thing. Sometimes people say these expressions that come from the internet that are very meme culture, where you're like, what does that even mean? Is that you? But when Uranus is in Gemini, we're really just trying to understand, like, on a micro level, what is your electric discourse? What is your radio feed? What are you taking in? Where is it coming from? Who are you speaking to? What is your group chat? What are your engagements like? Who do you interact with? How do you express yourself? We're really wanting to dial the frequency so that we can get to you. And a lot of these sort of, this can either be gaslight frequencies, this can be kind of numbness frequencies. Any of these sort of signals that are scrambling you or keeping you asleep are going to get really scattered and fucked with, because Uranus is really wanting you to develop the ability to speak as yourself, to communicate authentically with the right people and in the way that is true. And it is going to really want to fuck with a lot. It's very Truman Show. If you've seen the movie They Live, I really recommend it, with Rowdy Roddy Piper, which we get one of my all-time favorite lines in cinema. I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. But it's all about these sort of like transmissions that need to get fucked with. Uranus is the trickster. So I think anywhere where you've taken yourself really seriously or taken a side or taken a stand, the trickster is going to be the one doing the Gemini thing of being like, really? Because you sounded like this. Like I think for a lot of us who have, and this is very triggering for me, but if you have an online footprint, or if you have things you've said before that are now recorded for posterity, the trickster is going to really want to be like, what was that about? And is that who you are? Gemini deals a lot with blind spots because Gemini is about the duality. There is this person who's seeing your blind spots and revealing them, and no one likes that. That is always a pain in the ass. And when the trickster does that, it's trying to point out, like, why were you taking a stand for this thing when you were actually like being a total hypocrite? I think this is good because we're really wanting to make sure that our zoomed in micro spheres of existence and daily life feel full of clarity and integrity. And those people that we're talking to and engaging with, it feels like it's real. So we want to make sure that the awakening is happening in the micro, and that's really nice. There's something exciting and interesting here. Uranus takes 80 years to make a cycle. So when Uranus gets halfway through, you get something called a Uranus opposition. That goes down in your 40s. And then in your 80s, this will also be relevant for the president, you get something called a Uranus return. And these are these two really big sort of liberating, exciting, kind of all hands on deck, the gas is fully surging periods. Most specifically, when one is in their 40s, and this is going to be very relevant for people born in the 80s, you get something called the Uranus opposition. If you thought that the Saturn return at the end of your 20s was like the event, I think the Uranus opposition is major. And for people who are in their 30s now or 40s who want to know like what the fuck that is, I will be doing a mini bonus episode where I'm going to break down kind of like historically for a lot of our favorite icons what that's looked like and how this sort of Promethean entity can be channeled when you're in your 40s. I would definitely say that if you are a Gemini, you should book a reading with me. But if you are a Gemini, this is going to be a big, we are going to be ripping the roof off the house. Magneto has come. But I would really recommend that you look in your chart. Where is this transformation going down? Where is the transmission getting fucked with? Who is going to be acting as the agent of chaos or change? I would also say with Uranus and Gemini, I mean, I think the thing that is exciting about this is, which I think I've been kind of explaining, we are going to be seeing a lot of new modes and new platforms and new elements and new devices and new, the newspaper, the railroad, the telegraph. So there's new shit coming in. And even I was just emailing with a future podcast guest and they were like, wow, I can't wait until the future when we can look back on email and kind of laugh because it was so obsolete and so tedious. But I would just say like, this is a really exciting time to leap onto something that is very cutting edge. I was talking about psychedelic therapy, but despite all the madness and the chaos, this is a really exciting time to ride these sort of new currents and explore these new concepts or ideas. And to do that, yeah, you don't want to be too married to anything. That's really hard for me because I'm a Taurus and I fear change. So that's something to think about. The big thing to fear is sort of moral, intrinsic, trenchant decisiveness. There needs to be a sense of play and freedom and liquidity. If you want to know more, listen to our bonus episode, book a reading with me. Send us questions and comments, ... to ask@heavenlybodiespodcast.com. Tell the Geminis in your life that they've got to listen to this episode and they simply must subscribe. And because they're Geminis and they can't shut their mouths, they should leave a long and glowing review. I have been David Odyssey. We will be back here next Wednesday. We would love if you subscribed and we can't wait to hear more from you. You can find me at davidodyssey.com. Thank you so much for being here and let's see what the future has in store. I'll see you on the other side. Mwah. Thank you for listening. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by David Odyssey and produced by Matthew Breen and Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others discover the show. I'd love to get to know you. So email questions and visions to ask@heavenlybodiespodcast.com and book a reading with me at davidodyssey.com. Until our next trip, keep looking up.